Welcome to my guide on how to get Diamond with Zhonya. Let's start it off with talking about why I love playing Zac. There's so many great things about him. He's really high mobility because of his E, especially once you have it fully maxed. He's really tanky, he's got a lot of CC, and he does tons of damage for a tank. Just like all the people in top lane that play Ornn, you get to do it too with Zac and be just as busted. Especially if you got something like a Yasuo. That's always a fun kind of wombo combo to do. And if you make mistakes on him, it's really easy to see where you went wrong, because a large majority of the time it's just you missed your E, missed your Q, or maybe you were using it when you were visible, so they were able to easily avoid it. He fits in a lot of different comps, and he's even a great blind pick, so if you're just wanting to one-trick him in solo queue, you can absolutely do that. The last great point about him is that his strong suit is against ranged champions, and I know a lot of people hate playing against ranged champs. Unfortunately, of course, there are some downsides of Zac. I'm not going to try to pretend like they don't exist. The main one being that his E is cancelable. So if you're playing against a Janna or a Syndra, anything with a knockback, knock up, etc., it can really mess you up whether you're mid-flight or even while charging. It can get very annoying to deal with. Another thing that I briefly mentioned before is that your E is very dodgeable. So if you're not playing around Fog of War like you're supposed to, especially if the opponent has a dash or their flash up, it can be very hard to land sometimes. Very important thing to figure out on Zac is that you can't follow up on invades very well. You may think that the E or Q is tempting to start, but if you do that, your clear is going to be miserable level 1. You have to start your W. Due to the same reason, Zac can be vulnerable to late invades because of that weakness. He's also not very good at level 3 ganks because he just doesn't simply have the range on his E until he has multiple points in it. The last point is that his clear isn't the worst, but it's definitely not ideal. There are a lot of champions that can outpace him in the jungle when it comes to clearing camps, but that's fine because Zac usually will end up outscaling them or having higher value in a team fight. I'm going to start off with talking about the summoner spells, runes, all of that, and then get into the rank specific stuff later. Summoner spells are very straightforward, just a standard smite and flash. Do not take anything else. For the runes, every single game you should be taking resolve. That consists of Aftershock, Font of Life, Conditioning, and Revitalize. You also want to be taking Ability Haste and HP. When it comes to the second part, you could take either Adaptive or Armor depending on your preference. I personally take Adaptive because I would rather have the slightly faster clear. For the build on Zac, you want to go Moss Stomper or Green Pet every single game. Do not take a potion, it's not needed, his clear is way too healthy, and you want to just save the 50 gold. Ideally for your first back, you'll be getting Balmy Cinder and Darksteel. You should be able to get that if you're doing your clear correctly and you're farming camps well. However, if there's a situation where you aren't able to do that because you have to recall earlier, that's fine. Just get flat Balmy Cinder and you'll be good to go. After you've got your Balmy Cinder, you want to recall ideally on Sunfire Gold. The reason is because Chain Vest does not increase your clear or increase your ability to get more gold in general. So it's much better ideally to stay on the map and continue to farm camps until you do have enough gold for Sunfire at that 1,700 threshold. After that, you can get your Lucidity Boots. Lucidity Boots is something you should be going every single game on Zac because it's just so good with his kit. You get the CDR, which gives him more healing because you get more blobs and you get more damage. You also get more mobility because it's significantly reducing the cooldown of Zac's E. All around, just a fantastic item on him, so every game, take it. After your boots, you get Radiant Virtue. This is due to the recent nerf in 13.17 to Evenshroud. Maybe I'll change my mind on it. If I do, I'll put it in the description or pin a comment, something like that. But for the time being, I think Radiant Virtue is the way to go. These are all of the items that I think you could realistically cook on Zac. Please don't do anything outside of this unless a major change to an item occurs in the future. Demonic Embrace sounds like a really good item on paper for Zac, but realistically it's not all that fantastic. It's a decent damage item if you just really need more damage in a particular game, but if you are going to get it, typically it's more of like a 4th or 5th item. A much better damage alternative for Zac is Mejai's Soulstealer. You already have the Dark Seal, you can upgrade it once you get a bunch of stacks. It's really easy to build up because you get a ton of assists on Zac. It's also really cheap, plus it's a legendary even for that price. Zhonya's is a magic damage item that you could cook in very niche situations where you're getting cancelled a lot and you just want to make sure that your E goes through, because the Zhonya's effect will still allow your E to land, but they cannot cancel it. Banshee's is for a similar reason as Zhonya's, but it also gives you some MR instead of armor. Speaking of MR, Zac has some fantastic MR options, those being Spirit Visage and Abyssal Mask. You can in theory go Force of Nature in a very particular situation where you really need the mobility to get out after you go in, and they have repeat damage like a Cassiopeia or Aurelian Soul, but you would almost never build it. Now that Zac is going Radiant Virtue, typically Spirit Visage is going to be your default MR item because it increases the healing and it's just a fantastic synergy. However, if your team has a lot of magic damage, then you may benefit more from the Abyssal Mask because you'll increase your teammates' damage as well. For armor, you have some great options. You have Randuin's Omen, which is really good for if you need the slow to stick to somebody or if they're doing a lot of crit damage. Thornmail for if they have a lot of healing, specifically if they're going to be auto-attacking you. In very rare cases where the opponent is not going to auto-attack you, like a Vladimir, then you can opt into Morellonomicon or at least Oblivion Orb for a while, but you would only do that if your teammates aren't getting Grievous Wounds. Ideally, you don't have to get Morellonomicon. The last armor option is Knight's Vow. This can be great if you have a really fed carry and you want to play kind of like a second support in a way, where you're just protecting them with your Knight's Vow. Gargoyle Stoneplate is typically the item that I go third because it gives you both armor and MR. And it's really great synergy with Zac because when you go in, you can use your Stoneplate, and it's really hard for the opponent to deal with because usually with Stoneplate, the opponent wants to kite and wait for it to go down, but they can't because you're already in the middle of all. The last item is Anathema's Chains. This is typically going to be something for really late into the game at the earliest 5th item if they have a really fed carry and you just have to lock them down. If you are gold or below, then you should only be taking Inspiration secondary, so that will be the Magical Footwear and Cosmic Insight. The reason those runes are good is because Zac does not need boots early, so you can get the free boots, it'll allow you to save some gold, and Cosmic Insight is great for being able to use his Smite and Flash more often, which are both very important on Zac. If you're plat or above, I recommend you also experiment with Precision secondary. This rune page is fantastic for if the enemy team has a ton of CC, because it allows you to have Legend Tenacity, and then you can also take Triumph, which will increase your income just a little bit more. I personally prefer Overheal just to be a little bit tankier when I go in, but Triumph is perfectly fine. For leveling your abilities, you want to start level 1 with W, level 2 Q, and E for level 3. The reasons you do this is because if you don't start W, your clear is very, very slow. You need the Q for the lower cooldown and just general damage, and E is just your last ability to take. Beyond level 3, you then want to prioritize maxing E first, W second, and Q last. Beginning with Iron, you want to make it as easy as possible to do the same thing over and over again. So take the same rune page, the same build every game for the most part. If you have a really late game and you want to tweak the last couple items, that's okay, but try to keep the same build core at least every single game. Focus more on quantity of games over quality. So if you have a game where you can only get like 60-70% of your best, that's okay. Just get the games in, keep playing Zac, and you should still see some progress. I want you to start topside and full clear down to bot side every single game. Enemy junglers will start bot side a very large majority of the time in Iron because they want to have the bigger leash. And so that way you don't even have to worry about enemies invading you because you'll go the opposite direction. After you finish your full clear, I do not want you to gank, I want you to immediately recall. After you've recalled, if you have enough gold for Balmy Cinder, you can buy that. If your clear was a little bit faster and you don't have quite that much gold, then you can buy a Ruby Crystal and a Dark Seal or whatever you can afford. After you've done your first clear, again you go to topside and clear down, and only gank when all 6 of your camps are down. What this will allow is that even if you mess up a gank, it's okay because you're not losing out on any camps. But if you try to gank before the camps are down and you mess up the gank, then you're going to lose golden XP because you're not killing the camps when you're supposed to be. Don't worry, as you get higher up in rank, then I will recommend that you gank at other timings. But for now, keep it very, very simple. Just make sure your camps are down and then gank. Do not invade whatsoever. Don't invade at all. Just keep it the exact same every game if possible. For each rank, I'm going to have a full clear minimum goal, whether you're starting blue side or red side. So for Iron, the blue side minimum goal is 355, and for red side it is 4 minutes. This is something that you should be able to do in practice tool very consistently before you go into your rank games. If you're in bronze, we have some changes from iron. Starting off with, I want you to put a lot more emphasis on how you use your E's. They should be from Fog of War, and ideally your opponents don't have dashes. You want to make sure that when you are going for your E's, you're really putting a lot of focus on it, making sure you're hitting as many of them as you can, and that they're really high quality E's. Because if you don't land your E's, you're missing out on a lot of damage, because then it's harder to land your Q or your ultimate, whatever else you want to use in your combo. It also makes it harder for your teammates to land abilities, so you've got to make sure your E's are good. It's really important on Zac. Unlike an iron, I am now recommending that you be willing to gank after you've cleared the camps for the side that you're on. So let's say that you've done your full clear once, you've recalled, you've come back, and you do your top side, and you think top lane looks pretty gankable. All right, then you can go gank top lane because you've already cleared your top side camps, and that's perfectly okay. Same thing if you're on bot side, you clear your bot side camps and you can go and look to gank bot lane. However, what I don't want you to do is gank before you do the camps, because again, just like iron, we want to have a consistent game plan of getting our golden XP. The one exception to this is if your ultimate is up, then you can go gank even if your camps are up if you think it's a really good gank. Let's say the opponents are really pushed up, you have your ultimate ready to go, your teammates are ready, then sure, you can look to do that. When it comes to team fights later in the game, I only want you to fight if you have your ultimate and your passive is up. Otherwise, I want you to just wait until you have both of them available and look for a better opportunity. Just continue to farm in the meantime. If you want to look for like some smaller skirmishes, that can be okay, but again, you want to make sure that for significant fights, like a Drake fight especially, you want to make sure both of those are up and ready to go. Also, now that you're in bronze, I want you to start at the beginning of the game looking at where the enemy's leashed. If you see bot laners showed up pretty late, but the top laner showed immediately, then I want you to ping the enemy jungler start at bot side. Or the same thing with the reverse. If the enemy jungler seems like they started top side, then make sure to ping missing so your teammates know where the jungler is to give that info ahead of time. The full clear minimum goal for blue side for bronze is 350 and the red side is 355. Silver, bet you were done focusing on your E's past bronze? Nope. Keep on doing it. But a lot more effort into making sure your E's are really good. A lot of times you may even be wanting to cancel your E's. You can look for it, be like, oh, maybe this works here, and then cancel it and back off. That's okay. Cuts off part of the cooldown, not a big deal. You just have to make sure that if you do take the E, you know it's going to land a large majority of the time. You're not looking to use your E just to land your Q, it needs to land. You have to hit the E. Back in iron and bronze, I wanted to focus more on quantity over quality. But now that you're in silver, quality needs to become more of the focus. Of course, you do still need to play games consistently, but make sure that those are clean games, or at least you're showing your best self in those games and you're playing as best you can. Now you need to start looking at your recall timings more, beyond just the simple recalling when you have enough gold. For Balmy Cinder, you need to keep that up as you continue to go, thinking about, do you have camps up? Do you need to get a recall for the Sunfire purchase? Maybe you should recall a little bit earlier because of a Drake spawn. Put a little bit more work into reviewing your recalls and making sure that they are good. Or of course, if you have any difficulty, you can always ask me or somebody else how to get better at it. You should now start working more on basic ganking principles. So looking at if your allies have good CC to work with, are the enemies low, are they really pushed up? Just practice it more and more and slowly get better over time at your ganks. By now, I recommend that your full clear minimum be 345 for blue side and 350 for red side. In gold, not only do I want you to keep working on your E's, but now you need to work on your Q's as well. One very common mistake that Zac players like to do is they'll throw their E and then they'll immediately start spamming their Q, which is not a good habit to have. Instead, what you want to do is you want to E, immediately W, and then Q once the knockup is running out, or maybe you could even hold the Q for later. It just depends on how easily can the opponent get out. If they have flash, you might want to wait until they flash and then use your Q. So really put a lot of focus on how are you using your Qs and making sure you're getting as much value as you can. Another way you can start using your Q is later on in team fights. You can use your first Q on either a champion or a minion, whatever you want to do, and then flash and auto with the next part of your Q. That way you're guaranteeing that you're going to be able to land your E, which is super important so that you maximize your damage. The great part about this combo is, let's say you miss the first Q, you can still back off. Or you can always throw the first Q at the minion, and so that way you guarantee that it will land. When it comes to this kind of combo or any Q combo in general, be a little bit more creative with how you set it up. For example, your Q1, it can be used on camps like dragons, Gromp, etc. And then your Q2, you can still use on those same camps, but you can also use it on plants like Blast Cone or Honey Fruit. It even works on Nefari's dogs. No, a lot of people really hate playing against champions with pets, but it's fantastic for setting up a combo with Zac. If you haven't already, I definitely recommend you unlock your camera, get a lot more comfortable with it. If you gotta play a lot of normal games, so be it, get it down. It's really important on Zac, or just jungling in general, to be able to look at your lanes, move your camera, make sure you get those proper E's going. I also want you to start putting more emphasis on getting Drakes with your team. Being able to play for Soul is always a fantastic way to win games, and it's very, very simple to do. Just, do you have your teammates with you? Can you win the fight? Great, it's probably a good time to get the Drake. I also want you to start paying more attention to wave states of the lanes. If you need to, you can watch a wave management video on YouTube. There are plenty of them. Just learn the very basics. You don't have to go super extreme because you are a jungler and you're gold after all. You don't need to know really high level stuff. Just understand, how does a slow push work? What is a freeze? How can you respond to different kind of situations from the jungler's perspective? For gold players, the full clear minimum for blue side is 340 and red side is 345. Platinum. I want you to start experimenting with Raptor start if you're on red side, because it's a fantastic way to get your level 6 a little bit faster, and you will have to be careful if you play against champions that can clear your Raptors fast or have just a clear, or just have a fast clear in general. They can look to steal it. So as I said, experiment with it, practice it, figure out when you like it, when you don't like it, and then go from there. Start being a little bit more adaptive with your build. In lower ranks, I wanted you to just do your standard build over and over again, but as you get a little bit better, play a lot more Zac, you should be able to get a little bit more comfortable. Not super crazy, don't start cooking, but get a little bit more adaptability in it. So for example, if you say they have a lot of magic damage, you may decide to do Abyssal Mask third instead of a Stoneplate. Or if they have a lot of armor and healing, you could maybe do a Thornmail third. Just think a little bit about what the enemy comp wants or what they have, and change just small things. I still want you to stick to the main core though. In Platinum, you should start holding your smites on your second clear for the first Drake spawn, especially because if you're still starting topside like I recommended, then you'll be there on time to look to get the Drake, especially if the enemy jungler started the opposite side. A lot of the time they'll go and gank top lane around this window. You can see that, use your first smite on the Drake, and then use the second smite because it'll be up by the time you're finishing it, and that way you'll have that good advantage at the very beginning. Of course, if the enemy jungler is bot side and there's a risk of you getting fought and you might lose that fight, then don't do anything super crazy, but it's just something you need to start looking for in your games. Also in fights, whether it be just smaller skirmishes or team fights altogether, you need to be more willing to peel for your teammates sometimes instead of just engaging. So if you have a really fed carry, or if the enemies have a lot of knockbacks that you're kind of scared of, then maybe you want to play back, play it slow, let them come into you, and then tear them apart when they try to dive onto your ADC. However, let's say your ADC is really behind, or the enemies don't really have any way to stop your engage, they're all clumping up, then sure, go for your normal engage. Start tracking the enemy flash cooldowns so that you know, at least roughly, when they're going to be coming up. And so, if you know that they're down, continue to abuse that. Keep on going to that lane, using your E, just kill after kill, because they don't have a way to get out of your E. In mid to late game, I want you to start looking to invade enemy jungle camps a little bit more. It's a fantastic way to get picks, because you can take their camps while still protecting your teammates because you're nearby them in the enemy jungle. And then you can hop over the wall and get a kill, or you can just hop on back out. However, I don't want you to be doing invades early game because you are playing Zac, you need to get your golden XP, and just in general, it's something I'm going to leave until Emerald, where you get more and more comfortable with what you can pull off with Zac. Along with that same train of thought, I want you now to start respecting enemy invades even more, so making sure that if they have a really strong early jungler like a Lee Sin that might want to invade you, maybe you decide to skip a camp and come back to it later after placing a ward, seeing if the enemy actually shows up or not, and making sure that you're not dying, getting your camp still consistently. I also want you to start using Mejai Soulstealer more, as you have a lot of stacks on Dark Seal, making sure that if you're playing well, you're using that Soulstealer to build your lead, make sure you hold on to those stacks, use your passive if you need to, just make sure that you're comfortable with holding on to a lead. You can start using the precision tree, as I mentioned way earlier in the guide. So you can do that if the enemy team has a lot of CC and you think it is an applicable time to use it. The full clear minimum goal for blue side is 335 and red side is 340. Emerald, if you're in this rank, you're almost a diamond. I believe in you, just follow this guide and you'll make it. Stay patient, keep working hard. First point, be more willing to intentionally use your passive to win a fight. I know it can be scary and kind of contradictory to maybe the habits that you have built up from the earlier ranks, but you do need to be willing to use it as a tool to gain advantages. If you're never using your passive, then you're missing out on some advantages that you could be gaining. Your passive is especially good in dives because you can tank a lot of turret shots with it. As you're clearing, I want you to start paying more attention to the minimap to see if the enemies move to ward. If you know that they warded, then you may want to path a different way or just not gank the lane entirely, depending on the variables. However, if you know that they didn't ward, then obviously it's going to be a lot easier to gank because you know exactly where you can come from. I want you to start paying more and more attention to wave states of your laners. And if you can see that they're trying to slow push and they're not going to be able to crash, which would put them in danger of potentially dying to either just the regular laners or even the jungler, then you may need to go there and help them crash that wave before you leave to go help elsewhere. Just like with Platinum, I want you to start adapting your build even more to get more and more comfortable with changing it up. Of course, the core still stays the same, but the 3rd through 6th item you can definitely change up depending on what's going on in the game. By the time you're in Emerald, you should be comfortable enough with builds to know if it's a good game for Anathema's chains and start using that on some good targets. Of course, if the game is appropriate for the item, it's not something you build every game and it's more of a later game item, but it can be a fantastic tool. Back in Gold, I recommend you start playing around Drakes, but now in Emerald, not only should you be playing around Drake win cons, but you should also be looking to play around Heralds. They're a fantastic way to get a really good gold advantage. And sometimes you may have to give up a Drake. Sometimes you just don't have mid prio, you don't have bot prio. It's kind of tough. Enemy jungler's already there, and you may just have to trade. That's okay. Do what you can. Get advantages where you're able to. Start invading the second rotation camps of the enemies. So earlier I said don't really invade early until you're in Emerald. And now if you're in Emerald, you should absolutely be looking to do that. Start invading their second rotation camps, especially if they do Raptors start. What you can do, let's say you're blue side and you're starting for blue, you do your regular full clear, and then sometimes if they start Raptors, they may get a funny idea to go gank bot lane. Well, guess what? That means they don't have enough time to get to Raptors before you do. So you can go take their Raptors before they're able to get there. Ping, 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 all the time. I want you to make decisions for yourself and for your teammates, and be very confident in your decisions. I don't care if they're wrong. You just need to make a decision so that way you can learn from it. Ping all the time, making sure that you're going there and taking some risks. If you don't do this, then it's going to be really hard to learn from anything because then you're just going to be following your teammates instead of your own. The full clear minimum goal for Emerald, blue side is 330, red side is 335. I'm going to be doing 3 example reviews for various elos, and in those you'll be able to see kind of like what I'm expecting you to be able to do with this guide, going through the points and then being able to see in your own examples whether you were following it as you were supposed to or where things were going wrong. The first review is going to be following a silver Zac one trick. As I'm doing this review, I will be going over not only just what's important for silver, but also the lower ranks, because as I said, it builds upon the other notes. The first thing worth pointing out is that he is starting bot side, which I'm not a fan of. I'd rather him start top side. But regardless, that is what he did. Drop, and the enemy bot lane leashed, so he should be pinging that the Sejuani is starting bot side. Doing your own reviews, this should be a fairly straightforward process that you can go through, just going down the list and seeing did it match what I'm recommending. And use the full clear time. Obviously not perfect because he is silver after all, but it definitely is much better than the minimum goal, so I'm happy with that. And as I said, that is a bare minimum goal. Of course, I would like for it to be faster, but it's a good starting point, just making sure you have at least that before you queue up. Alright, so here's the first big thing. Zac here sees the ward with the red trinket, and Akali even starts moving back. Zac begins to charge his E. Now what should he do? He should recognize that this gank is not going to work because Akali's backing away. She has a dash available, being her E, and he should cancel his E. That's what he should do. back out, look to recall. That is the play. Alternatively, what he could do is he could go to bottom scuttle, but I think that it's unlikely for it to still be up because Sejuani did not show on the top scuttle. It's probably already down, but it may be up. And it does end up being up, so he takes the scuttle. But then if you're going to do the second scuttle, like if you're not going to assume that Sejuani took it, which I do think you would get punished for doing something like this in higher elos, but in silver you can sometimes get away with it. So here you definitely should be looking to recall, because if we go back to what's important for ganking, you want to play around lanes that have a lot of CC or low HP enemies that are preferably pushed up. You don't really have any of that here because they're safely under their turret, and the only CC that you have to work with is Brand, which is not a super reliable CC, and it's only single target. So you don't really want to go for this, and you'd rather just do your recall. Already has enough for Balmy Cinder. That would be a fantastic time to back. It ends up wasting a lot of time. The Gromp's already up. Topside's starting to come up. It's not good. Oh no, this is really not good. Yep. And then ends up losing passive and dying. Okay, so if you're looking at your own game, this would be a fantastic point. So you stop the review and just get your takeaways from it. Main thing is, well, there's a few things. One, the E usage, making sure that it is a reliable E that you can actually land. If you can, great, you can look for it, but in that particular situation, it wasn't the case. And then beyond that, should you be recalling or should you stay? He had plenty of gold. Realistically, that scuttle should have already been down, but even if you do scuttle, definitely recall after that instead of going for a gank where there's not really much going for you. Now, if the bot laners were here, like your bot laners were here and enemy bot laners were here, then maybe you could argue going for the gank if the enemies are low HP. But those variables weren't there, so that would be kind of what you take away from this game. This review will be following a Platinum Zac. Of course, there will be more criteria for the review of the Zac than with the Silver review. Good to see him starting topside. Love to see it. In this particular game, it's a little bit harder to tell where the leash started, or where the enemy Lee Sin started, because both sides leashed. So it's okay not pinging here. It's a rare case. So one thing I do want to see is him being respectful of a potential Lee Sin invade and doing Krugs instead of red here. Yep, and there's the Lee Sin. And now it's gotten pretty ugly. Yasuo is on the way, but Orianna's here first. Pretty tough spot to be in. This is the E, this is the Q, and now it's really tough. So this would be a very quick spot to end the review for this player, but the main takeaway is that, as I said before, when it's an early game jungler like Lee Sin, especially when you don't know where he started, you need to be thinking about where is he going to invade you and how is he going to invade. So they're always going to invade the buff. They're not going to do Raptors. So he's going to either wrap around here or here. Regardless, as long as you skip the red and drop a ward, then you're okay. Because you can drop the ward here in the brush, go do your Krugs, and you're all good. And you can just ping your teammates to come help you. But in a situation like this, especially when he burned his ward level 1 right here, it's pretty hard to deal with the invade. Going in blind. The third and last review is of a Gold 1 Zac. He ends up opting to start bot side. I'm not a fan of it, especially this game, because it's going to be really hard to gank an Akali since she's E out of his shroud. Or not his shroud, sorry, his E. He's the one with shroud. Regardless, does her camps, and let's see where the E started. So Akali shows at the beginning, and he did not ping that the Yi started bottom like he was supposed to. Clear up. Normally, you would go straight to Scuttle, but since we see the Yi here trying to get the low HP Olaf, I'm perfectly okay with this counter gank. I think it's great. Now, when we're thinking of E usage, we want to try to do it from Fog of War, and ideally when the Yi's Q is down. Now, this gets a little bit difficult because the Olaf runs into the brush instead of towards Zac, so it's going to be tough to pull off. But at least he did wait for the E to Q, so this is good. Then you hit the E. This is great. Did miss the Q though. Happens. Still gets the Akali, but passive is lost. Okay. And he can do Scuttle, but he's got to be really fast. He doesn't have E. The problem is, he didn't aim his E precisely enough. It needs to push the Scuttle this way, so he needs to hit at the edge of the Scuttle, the other side. Ended up going a little bit too far forward, and so then Yi was able to get into range. It's very close timing. It's also hard to do because vision was lost on the Scuttle, so it's an understandable mistake. By the way, it's got a lot of gold, so I like the recall. Get Balmy Cinder, and then ideally, you would get Dark Seal here. You could also get a Control Ward. What I don't like is doing the Wolves. The reason you don't want to do the Wolves first is because then you're kind of out of options when you clear, because you're going to do Wolves, and then either you do your Gromp or you go Scuttle like he did. But then if you do Scuttle, you go into Gromp, you have to run around. And it's just not ideal, the amount of time that you're having to spend, and the camps aren't synced up properly on the timers for spawn. Plus, bot lane isn't really all that gankable right now, so I don't think you have a big need to path towards bot lane, and that's why I'd rather you just start the Gromp. As I said before, even if you were to gank, ideally you would have cleared your bot side first before going for a play like this to make sure you have all of your golden XP even if something goes wrong. Regardless, let's look at the execution of the gank. Zeri does use her dash here. It's a very long cooldown, so Zac's coming in. And if the Zac player saw that, then that's great, and he should use that information when going for this play. Then he can proceed to try to hit the Zeri with his E, and she's also exhausted, so she will be forced to flash. So this is good. Really good. She flashes. However, he's not patient with his Q. So here's the problem with the Q, and this is why I say, especially in gold, it's really important to start focusing on your Q usage. Hit the flash, but then the Leona's in melee range right now. There is no need to slow the Leona. And ideally what you would do is you would hold on to your Q. If the Zeri walks back in, then you can try to Q the Zeri. Otherwise, you can just slow the Leona after she's out of your auto attack range. But right now, Zac has red buff. So he can just keep slowing her by autoing, and it'll be much easier to stick to Leona if he does it that way than if he Qs at the very beginning And he also ends up missing it because he's rushing it too much. And Leona actually ends up living because of this misplay, which is super significant. Now, she goes back in for no reason, thankfully. So he kind of gets bailed out on that, but that would have been a really big flip up there. And Misfortune ends up dying, but that's kind of whatever. The main thing to focus on you is the sequence of how he's going from camp to gank. I don't think was ideal. Should have done camps first, and then he can look for a gank if he wants to. But then also the Q usage, making sure that he is being very patient with it, knowing when he can land it. Otherwise, just keep using the red buff for auto attacking while they're in melee range until you get a better opportunity. You don't have to throw your ability immediately, and sometimes you don't have to throw your ability at all. Sometimes it's better to just keep using autos and Ws.